During a period of mass formation, psychosis, 30% of a population are hypnotized and helpless. 40% watch and wait, 29% are awake and alert, and 1% bang the drum. During the dark times of the COVID panic, Dr. Kulvinder Kaur Gill banged the drum. In recent news, Elon Musk announced that he will help pay the fines that Dr. Kulvinder Kaur Gill earned in her fight for sensible health policy during the COVID panic. What I find interesting about this is how the corporate press, which served as the propaganda arm of the COVID regime, is spinning this. It is a perfect example of Michael Malice's maxim that the corporate press is factual but not truthful. They all report on a limited number of facts in order to obscure the truth that Dr. Gill was right. Dr. Gill first earned the wrath of the nascent COVID regime for correctly questioning lockdowns, pointing out that they provided no health benefits and entailed substantial harms. In doing so, she was merely echoing the wisdom of health giant D.A. Henderson, as well as the pre-pandemic plans of all Western nations. She linked to studies and tweeted common sense. Unfortunately, for Dr. Gill, the COVID panic was now in full force, and the COVID regime, the manifestation of that panic, did not respond well to facts and logic. Rather than reply with studies or facts of their own, they viciously attacked her as being everything from an anti-vaxxer to an idiot. They used their positions of power to stir up hate mobs against Dr. Gill, encouraging them to level complaints against her through her government regulator. To learn more about why the COVID regime responded to Dr. Gill with such vicious, emotional attacks as opposed to reason, see my previous video on Scott Atlas, Mr. Spock, and public health. Link in the description. In an effort to clear her name, Dr. Gill launched a defamation action against the individuals and organizations that were attacking her. Here, the courts would fail, as the judge, without hearing any evidence, accepted an anti-slap motion against Dr. Gill. This ruling was a perversion of this law, as anti-slap motions are meant to prevent powerful entities from silencing the little guy. This was not the case here, as all of the defendants had insurance, were well-funded, and were associated with large institutions with big teams of lawyers. To add further insult to injury, in an unprecedented move, the judge ordered a $1.2 million judgment against Dr. Gill. Through various legal proceedings, this amount would eventually be lowered to a still unjust amount of $300,000. What this episode demonstrated is how a moral panic not only destroys the judgment of scientists, doctors, and journalists, but judges as well, by not even looking at the evidence the court was taking, what is known as a judicial notice. A judicial notice is when a fact is so well known, such as that the sky is blue, that the court doesn't need to see evidence of it. Later, the court allowed a legal maneuver known as a fair comment defense. This is a defense against defamation that can be used if what the defamers are saying is factual. In the court's view, the defendants were using approved facts, meaning the facts that were promoted by the government, as opposed to facts based on evidence and established science. I want to emphasize how much the courts failed Dr. Gill and Canadians by issuing these judgments without even looking at the evidence. When the mob is on the move, the courts can, if they are doing their job, have the power to take a stand against it and bring some reason to madness. For example, in December of 2019, Portuguese judges looked at the evidence and correctly raised questions about the effectiveness of PCR tests and whether they can be used as a basis to quarantine people. Judges are not dumb, and if they take the time, they can discern that 2 + 2 = 4. What Dr. Gill's case shows is that, in a panic, judges can be just as irrational as everyone else. Again, see my previous video on Scott Atlas and Mr. Spock. With a Give Send Go campaign raising $200,000 and Elon Musk covering the rest, the corporate press was forced to cover the story. True to form and in keeping with Michael Malice's maxim, they only reported the facts they needed to in order to obscure the important truth that Dr. Gill was right. Every policy that the COVID regime imported from China was unjustified and harmful. From lockdowns to social distancing, to masking, to vaccine mandates. It was all nonsense, the consequences of a mass hysteria conjured up by the propaganda masters in Beijing. What all arms of the COVID regime are now struggling with is how to hide this reality. By importing the Fang Kong policies of China and ignoring the wisdom of D.A. Henderson, they took a blowtorch to civil society. Now they wonder why things are not so civil, and they fear what the consequences will be for them when enough people realize this fact. Fear dissipates, but truth remains, and the truth is that Dr. Gill and other brave critics of the COVID regime were right. Despite the best efforts of the corporate press, the truth will come out. It is not a question of if, it is questions of when. If you found this content useful, please like this video as it really helps the channel out. If you have any questions, please leave them in the comments, and I'll see you next time. If you hated the era of the COVID regime as much as I do and want to ensure that it never returns, get my free ebook, The Little Book of COVID Red Pills, at redpillcovid.com. It is the baby version of a larger book I am writing and contains the top 5 arguments you can use against supporters of the COVID regime. Get it today at redpillcovid.com.